Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Harvard Art Museums and this evening's screening and discussion of Asmarina. My name is Andrea Schoenberg, and I am a senior living in Leverett House, and I concentrate in sociology. I am a member of the Harvard Art Museum Student Board, and am delighted to welcome you to the museum on behalf of our student community. Please now be sure to turn off your cell phones and help me to warmly welcome Lorgia García Peña, Roy G. Klaus Associate Professor in the Department of Romance Languages and Literatures, who will introduce tonight's program.
Good evening. On behalf of the Department of Romance Languages and Literatures and the Harvard Art Museums, I would like to welcome all of you tonight to the screening of Medhin Paolos' documentary film, Asmarina. I want to take a moment also to thank our special guests today, film director Medhin Paolos and Dr. Angela Davis. It is truly an honor for our students, faculty, and community to have you here with us at Harvard. And I'm sure that I speak for everyone here in this room when I say that we're all so excited to watch the film and to hear from both of you. I also want to thank the organizers of the DACA seminar, as well as the Warren Center, the Hutchins Center, the Schlesinger Library, for their support. And lastly, but most certainly not least, the staff that made this program possible: Molly Ryan, who you'll see running around a lot, Kathy Coviello, and Arthur Patton. Thank you so much for your great work. This event is part of a larger and much longer conversation that Harvard students and faculty have been sustaining for a couple of years now regarding the relationship between race, immigration, and citizenship, and in particular about our role as students, scholars, and citizens in protecting the lives of undocumented people, and in particular of our undocumented students, in this climate of increased hate and intolerance. Since the 2016 elections, students at Harvard have taken actions to support each other and demand of our institution tangible actions and resources to protect the most vulnerable in our community. One of the initiatives that resulted from student and faculty efforts was a series of seminars and conversations, as well as actions, organized under the rubric of the DACA seminar. This event concludes the series. As I pondered in my own research and teaching on the question of undocumented citizenship, I have been concerned with the ways in which the conversation has been encapsulated within the nation state, when in fact the so-called immigrant and refugee crisis is, as we know, a result of global structures of inequality that have always and continue to reproduce categories of exclusion of people based on race and justified on their ideas and notions of citizenship, nationality, and legality. Our program today then responds to a desire to open the conversation beyond the United States. Asmarina is a film about many things. It is a film about the power of stories to interrupt historical silences. It is a film about African diaspora, about Italian colonialism in Africa, and it's also a film about belonging and citizenship for all. Porque ningún ser humano es ilegal. Its director, Medhin Paolos, is an Italian Eritrean activist and artist who co-founded one of the most important immigrant rights organizations in Milan, the Second Generation Network. Among some of the most important advances of this organization is the drafting and active lobbying of a new legislation that challenges Italian bloodline citizenship law, which currently keeps descendants of immigrants born in Italy from acquiring Italian citizenship while it grants it to children of Italians who live abroad. The reform of Law 91, 1992 now awaits vote in Congress. In addition to her leading political work, Paolos is a photographer and a researcher. Currently, she is the co-director of Mind the Gap, a transnational digital humanities project that documents immigrant stories. To guide our conversation and thoughts today, we have the honor of welcoming someone who needs absolutely no introduction, but I'm gonna try anyway. Dr. Angela Davis is a distinguished professor emerita at the University of California, Santa Cruz, where it's warmer. Davis is known internationally for her ongoing work to combat all forms of oppression in the United States and abroad, and for her incisive scholarship on philosophy, transnational feminism, critical race theory, Black studies, and prison studies. Her publications, which are too many to enumerate, include Abolition, Democracy, Beyond Empire, Prisons and Torture, Women, Culture and Politics, Lectures on Liberation, and one of my personal favorites, Violence Against Women and the Ongoing Challenge to Racism. Dr. Davis' contributions, which, thanks to the efforts of the Schlesinger Library and the Hutchins Center, we will soon be privileged enough to study by going through her papers, and the archives will be available for consultation beginning this fall. So do look out for that, and also for her public lecture in October. But her contributions to scholarship and human rights, the lives that Angela Davis has touched both personally and through her work, will never be fully accounted for, as they cannot be contained in a physical archive. So I will not attempt to do so. Today, I simply want to thank you, Angela, for extending your back as a bridge so that I could stand here today. It is because of your work, your commitment and solidarity to social justice, and that of so many of the women of color feminists like Gloria Ansaldúa, Chandra Talpari Mohanty, Jackie Alexander, Cheri Moraga, and Lisa Lowe, that I am able to do the work that I want to do in the spaces that were clearly not created for people like me. So I am truly immensely humbled to have the chance to welcome you today, and grateful to you for bringing with you these women bridges in their spirit. So without further ado, I know you want me to shut up. I ask the audience to please help me in giving Dr. Angela Davis the warmest welcome to Harvard.
Well, thank you for the enthusiastic welcome. I thought I was only here in the capacity of providing a very brief, some very brief introductory comments to the film, and then to engage Medhin Paolos in conversation after the film. But I suppose I should say it is good to be here at Harvard University, where my papers now are. And I'm very glad it's not as cold as it was the last time I was in Boston. First of all, let me thank Lorgia García Peña for inviting me to participate in this event. And I should tell you that I had the opportunity to see this film 2 years ago, shortly after it was released, it was my first night in Rome, and someone said that there is this amazing film about Black Italians that will be screened. And it was a wonderful experience to see it in that context. And I'm very happy that the context within which the film is being presented this evening is the larger global context of migration, global migration, immigrant rights, particularly here in the US, and the persistence of colonial frameworks during this era we define as post-colonial. And I think it is especially important for those of us who live in the US to recognize how the US centrism, which is encouraged at every turn, defines the ideas with which we work, our consciousness, our relationships, often to the extent of misrecognizing global relationships, the relationships between the impact of post-colonial migration in Europe, for example, and the impact of immigration into the US. We tend to see the struggles we are now engaged in, unfortunately, set into motion by the person who now occupies the highest rungs of executive power in this country. You know who I'm talking about. I don't think I have to mention his name right now. But even as we engage in that opposition, whether it's through our scholarship, whether it's through our activism, we often fail to imagine the larger context, the global context. I believe, and I've said this on many occasions in the past, that the major civil rights issue of the 21st century is precisely the issue of immigrant rights. And this is true not only in the US, and not only in Europe, but in Africa, in South Africa as well, in South America, in Australia. And so I should say that I want you to view this film in your own way, because it's a very beautiful film. And I think I shouldn't ruin the aesthetic pleasure of the film by giving you an analysis in advance. So I'll wait until afterwards. But so I don't want to talk about the content of Asmarina, but I do want to point out that it made me realize how inadequate the paradigms of nationalism are for our time. We take for granted that the nation is the most appropriate form of human community. And at the same time, we have witnessed the globalization of capital, the rise of the globalization of everything, the extent to which knowledge, capital, ideas flow across borders. But as soon as human beings begin to join that flow, and oftentimes they have no other choice than to participate in these transnational flows, then they are perceived as illegal. That's why I like your T-shirt, Lorgia. No human being is illegal. The film made me think much more deeply about Italian colonialism, especially under conditions of fascism, and the way in which apartheid has traveled. And as I said, I'm trying not to recount the content of the film. But I can tell you that when I first saw the film, it made me realize, it made me more determined than ever to insist on the apartheid character of the Israeli occupation of Palestine, as I witnessed the impact of the Italian occupation of that area of Africa that came to be called Eritrea and Ethiopia. I also want to point to the way in which the film illustrates the production of history from below. And in that sense, it with the stories, the many stories that we get to witness during the course of the film, that there's a relationship with new social histories and the insistence on challenging the old paradigms of the production of historical knowledge. I also liked the emphasis on music, because you're familiar with the title of the film, right? Oh, should I? I'll let them. Yeah. So I really like the way in which music becomes an alternative space for the recognition of human relations, of ancestries, of histories, so that it becomes a space that is resistant to the nation that we usually think of as being the actual venue for ideas about home. And I also appreciate the way in which the film emphasizes the cultural dimensions, which brings two countries, people who come from two nations, together. I think that we have arrived at a historical moment when human aspirations exceed the possibilities of the nation state. And we see this in the closing of the US borders, the criminalization, the demonization of immigrants, the insistence on defining citizenship, not in any substantive way, not in a way that emphasizes a relationship to community and to democracy, but rather only as a function of papers, only as a function of documents. We see, I should tell you that a couple of days ago I was in Dublin, Ireland. It's not Dublin, California. I live near Dublin, California. And when I visit places like Ireland, I'm always impressed about the fact that people are still talking about the 1845 visit of Frederick Douglass. It's as if this happened, only a couple of years ago. I'm impressed by that kind of historical memory, because I think we lack that in the US. Something that happened 10 years ago has been relegated to the dustbin of history. Some of the examples of the ways in which human aspirations have now exceeded the very possibilities of the nation state, can be seen in the the refugee situation in Europe, refugees in Italy, of course, Greece. I recently visited Greece and had the opportunity to spend a great deal of time with refugees in various spaces, including a autonomously produced place for, it was actually an old hotel that had been abandoned, and refugees and allies in Greece basically squatted at the hotel and found electricity and found water, and it began to function as this really vibrant community in which the refugees themselves produce the means with which they are not only surviving but living. And I guess the final points that I wanted to make is that the global challenge to white supremacy is really important. White supremacy is one of those words, we used it when I was growing up in Birmingham, Alabama, when I lived in the most segregated city in the country, but that's because it was obvious. And then some of us as activists used it, but it fell out of usage until recently. And guess why? We're using it again. So Make America Great Again is really about making America white again. But America was never really white. And even the term America, America is a hemisphere. So, why do we in the US colonize the whole hemisphere? And then those of us who are of African heritage, and I see Henry Louis Gates is in the audience here. Why do we insist on calling ourselves African Americans? Particularly since most people of African descent who live in the Americas are not even covered by the category. African American is an exclusionary, nationalist-based category. Well, I should probably, let me stop preaching about that. But I wanted to also say finally, and we see this so beautifully in the film, that Europe is no longer white, if it ever was. Certainly Italy. As a person who's done work over the years around prison issues, I always make it a point to try to visit prisons wherever I am. And one of the things I noticed in Europe over the last 20 years is that if you want to figure out, where black people are, where Middle Eastern people are, all you have to do is go into the prisons. The same way if you visit a state like Utah, and which has like 1% black people, but go in the prisons. And anyway, any event, I think that the film will encourage some really important reflections on where we are at this moment in our history, and particularly the importance to make connections with what is happening in other parts of the world. And so let me thank Medhin Paolos for producing this wonderful film and for offering it as a gift to us, because I think it will help move us forward during this period. Thank you very much.
We trick you with the non-ending of the film. It never ends because in in reality, the story of the Eritrean Ethiopian community, it's not over. The idea behind this film, and I would like to mention my colleague and co-director and very good friend, Alan Maglio. We did this together. See, the best thing in life I usually never do by myself, so I'm gonna keep collaborating project after project after project because it works for me. I second guess myself a lot, so I always need somebody who says, yeah, that's a good idea. The idea behind the film came from a few different things. In part is the fact that growing up in Italy, probably most of Europe, but Italy in particular, there's sort of a loss of memory. And when you go through school, through middle school, through high school, there's an empty space where the story of colonialism is supposed to be. So they really avoid talking about all things colonialism. And as a person of Eritrean descent, that's a big deal because I have all these stories and informations coming from my community and from my family and family friends. But I don't, and I know this is history. They're talking about history and not just the history of Ethiopia or Eritrea, but the history of Italy. So this movie is shot completely in Italy, mostly in Milan, a little bit in Bologna, a little bit in Parma, but not in Eritrea. Eritrea, Asmara, Ethiopia, you can only see it in the memory of the people who migrated. And the memories, so to speak, memories of the people who grew up abroad, just like myself, second generations. It's kind of filling up the spaces and bringing those stories to life and making sure that people knows that those stories are actually history. And just because somebody have yet to write part of it in books, it doesn't mean they're less important. I mean, there is a lot of it in books. It's just we don't have access to those books, not as easily. So there are a few things that we used to go through this movie to help us tell these stories. And one, like she mentioned, is the music, the song Asmarina. First of all, just simply because that man that you see in the beginning of the film mentioned it to us. It's not a very well-known song anymore. It's an old one. He says it's from the 30s. In reality, it's from the late 50s, so way post-fascism era. But the musicality of that song in particular, it takes you back specifically to the traditional songs that were going on in that era. And in fact, that's the first criticism that we received to the movie, where somebody saw not the trailer, like a short pre-edit of the movie, and they heard the song and they were asking us, "Oh, why did you use this song? It's not fascist, blah blah blah." But we left this information that this man gave us about the song being from the 30s, because it's his memory and it's relevant. This is not a historical documentary. And because it's a 70-minute documentary, and we try to tell the story of a community. It's so many issues in these 70 minutes that it's impossible to focus and give the proper space to each issue that we touched. What? Should I stop? Oh, sorry.
May I just ask you to talk about the reception the film has had, particularly in communities of Eritrean and Ethiopian people, not only in Italy, but what about in other places, such as this country?
Yeah, we received very, very contradicting, some people were very happy that this was made specifically because there is not much about us around. Whatever media you could mention, we're not there. So there was the simple pleasure of that. A woman in San Francisco a few months ago came to me after the film, and she said, "Oh, I'm so happy that I can finally see my people." That's what she said. My people laughing on screen. And I'm guessing that's because we're so used of being represented in the media on those boats, coming, trying to cross, from Northern Africa to Europe. So the images are always so heavy. And for once, she said, "Okay, we laugh," which is a fact of life. You go out with your friends and you laugh sometimes. Some other people were much harsher and actually appreciated the film up until we started touching upon the political situation in Eritrea specifically. There are great divides in the Eritrean community, even abroad, specifically for political reasons, because somebody mentioned it in the film. Because some people are strongly against the government and some other people are completely pro-government, but many people are simply scared to say anything either way. And that's the case even in the diaspora. I was telling her earlier that there is a very strong oppressive dictatorship in Eritrea, that it has very, very long arms, and I don't know how to say that in English, but it threatens the lives of people abroad, even people who were born abroad, because we are all still very much linked to Eritrea or Ethiopia, even though Ethiopia has a different situation. And many of us have relatives there, and it's a very complicated history. A few weeks ago, I was at Boston University for another screening. The African American department invited me, and the crowd was very much Ethiopian and also a little bit Eritrean. And this woman, at the end of the screening, she was very, she didn't, I could tell that she didn't know if she could say some things or not, just because she knew that I am of Eritrean descent. Just because of that, she wanted to invite me at some events of the Ethiopian community in Boston, which I would be honored, but she didn't know if she could do that, just because she knows that some people are really afraid to do what we used to do in our community in the 70s and 80s, which is be one, because those borders that the governments keep fighting over they don't have much to do with people. I mean, literally, we are the same people. I was born with an Ethiopian passport, even though my family is Eritrean, and I was born in Italy. Yeah.
Okay, we can open it up for questions or comments. Well, if no one has any questions, I have a lot of questions, but I wanted to make sure that people in the audience had the opportunity to participate.
There's one over there.
Hi, I'm Helen. I'm from the Eritrean community. And
hi.
Hi. There's a lot of us. We're all sprinkled around.
Oh, hi. Thank you for coming. I hope you enjoyed it.
My question is, for us younger people, I guess, aside from you know how you said you're filling the gaps in history that we don't learn?
Yes.
To an extent. How would you? Okay, how am I gonna phrase this? Okay, we're the idea that we're not really American, and then the idea that we're still foreigners when we go back home to Eritrea. So there's no real space that belongs to us. What would you say? What's your advice as far as filling that type of void that we'll forever live with?
I don't know if I have an advice, but that's actually my personal experience also. I spent my life in a country that wasn't supposed to be mine, and where nobody looks like remotely like me. Nowadays, more so. But then going back to either the Eritrean community or the Eritrea, you also are not really at home there. I had great expectations the first time I went to Eritrea because in my head I was going home. In reality, I only felt home in a very small village outside the capital. But the reality is that I have never felt more Italian as when I went to Eritrea. Yeah. It's a fact because, you know, it's not so much your clothes, it's the way you move, it's the way you talk, it's the way you express yourself with your body. You are something else. But the thing that I realized early on in my life is that I, and probably you also, from what you just said, we are part of this terra di mezzo, the land in the middle. You know, this sort of fictional, not even sort of fictional land in the middle. And that happens in all cities, all places, for all kinds of reasons, not just because of somebody's descent. It could be because you are an LGBT person mixed with something else. It can mean many things. But what I realized is that this land in the middle is already full of people. It's not something small and far away and hidden. It's not something for few people anymore. It's already populated by many interesting people. Look at this film. This is a small film that my colleague and I made for ourselves initially, and then we realized that, oh, people are actually interested. I mean, with the same idea that is behind Asmarina, you could tell so many different stories of so many different people because certain dynamics are actually very similar all around the world. It's very simple. Again, I don't have an advice. I just decided to own it. Nobody's gonna ever tell me again that I am not Eritrean enough just because my Tigrinya is broken. Nobody's gonna tell me that I'm not Italian because I'm not white. My parents worked and still are working in their almost 70s just so I can do a whole bunch of things, just so that I can choose and I can go around and make movies. And I'm gonna do that.
Take more questions. Molly, there's one right here.
Hi, I enjoyed your film.
Thank you.
I wanted to know more about the legislation in Italy toward immigrants.
Yes.
And I wanted to know about the relationship with the police.
With the police.
And, their immigration officers. And whether you all had some organization that you have set up to, deal with the situation there, and whether you're united with other African immigrants in, coming into Italy, but from different places besides the Horn of Africa.
I can barely hear, but I think I got it. I could barely hear you, but I think I understood more or less. If I didn't, just somebody said something. Well, the Italian situation is this one. Italy has a citizenship law in place that it was started initially to preserve the citizenship of the children of Italians who migrated in North America, South America, Australia, everywhere. So it goes by blood, so you inherit your citizenship. It was started in a historical moment where Italy was a country of migrants. But now, years later, the story switched, And now Italy is welcoming people. People are coming to Italy. So now we have all kinds of children of immigrants in Italy, but they're not recognized by the law, even if specifically because it goes by blood. And somebody like me who was born on Italian soil by immigrant parents, because I don't have Italian blood, I am not recognized as an Italian citizen until I turn 18. And then I have a window of opportunity where I can actually ask for citizenship. And if I meet all the requirements, then the requirements are basically two. You had to demonstrate to have been on Italian soil for your whole life, 18 years, and you have to demonstrate to have a certain, like a minimum income. So these are the two, but you cannot really ask an 18-year-old to show income, so you actually have to, once again, demonstrate through your parents' income. I don't think I think I understand why you ask about the report with the police, but I don't really think I can speak too much to that because it's a very different situation from what I observe in the States. But I can tell you that there are multiple organizations of immigrants. Usually, these organizations are from like a specific country, a specific community present in Italy. But the newer generations are actually mixing it up because they're realizing that the issue is common, is for everybody. So newer organizations where we're not so new anymore, like mine, Rete G2, Seconda Generazione, how you say it? Second generation network, which is all children of immigrants of different backgrounds from different Italian cities. Like mixing together to change a specific law, that's the best way that we found to attack that issue. And then you have, it also depends what your need is, because your need might be to know more about your identity, your culture, and then that's when you have your community of reference from a specific country in Italy. But if you are looking for change in Italian society, you actually have to come out with something different. And you have to realize that we have, even if we're different, we have so much in common that we have to unite our strength, our forces to go about a reform of law.
So may I ask a question? May I interject for a moment, Lorgia? I wanted to ask you about perhaps literature and works in other genres about the presence of Black people in Italy. I know I was able to see your film in Rome as a result of a connection with a graduate student who was a US graduate student. Actually, she's a Black British graduate student doing research in the US about Black people in Italy. And a former mentee of mine, Aseli Ajani, did some quite incredible research about Black women in Italian prisons, specifically about the stereotyping of Black women as Nigerian prostitutes, and the disproportionate numbers of Black women who are in Italian prisons based on, as a result of the drug trafficking. So I know that there's been interest and research, but I don't know the literature in Italian. I was wondering if there are young intellectuals who are doing that kind of research today that would accompany a film such as the one that you've made?
Yeah, no, we're starting to have more academics, few, but you know, especially writers, you know, Javashego, Papkuma. But again, Italy is so set in its ways that it's very difficult to accept anybody who literally doesn't look white as Italian literature in this case. So all these people, all these writers are seen and mentioned as migrant writers, even though they're writing in Italian about Italian issues.
And many of them are born in Italy, yeah.
Many are even born in Italy. It's very peculiar, the Italian way.
Yeah.
It's yes, and you are right. Italy uses prisons not unlikely other countries, including this one. So, and some people are simply more vulnerable. Black women coming from certain parts of Africa who actually are talked into coming for some reasons. They tell them one thing, and then once they're in the country, they are forced into prostitution, and then because prostitution is illegal, they somehow, you know, many times they end in prisons. It's awful.
Yeah, I was actually really shocked when I visited Italy a number of years ago. And of course we know that racism is pervasive, and not only in the US. But I was invited to speak in a relatively small city near Genoa on the case of the Cuban Five. Some of you may be familiar with that case a number of years ago. And the people who invited me were progressive. They imagined themselves as a part of a kind of a global community of radical progressive people. They picked me up at the airport, and I got in the car, and I saw this, what we would call a kind of Aunt Jemima figure hanging, you know, from the rearview mirror, and I was in shock. And I mentioned that I was hungry, and could we please stop to get something to eat? They stopped and brought me a bag of peanuts, and they were like Sambo figures on the peanuts. And I was saying, oh my God.
That is a very Italian experience that you had, and I apologize.
But you know what I had to do when I went to speak about the Cuban Five? I said, I'm really happy to speak about the Cuban Five, but I feel obligated to address racism here.
Yeah, I think you did something sort of prohibited. This is the thing. I'm sure there are some Italians in the crowd, they can say that it's not true, but it's the truth. So it is. At the very least, in this country, you are able to speak about racism somewhat freely, okay? In Italy, we barely have the language to speak about racism because even the word razza is considered like a bad manner. You would use razza for an animal, for a pet, for a dog. What razza? Which razza is your dog? You know, whatever. But not for people. Right. It's. I think it got confused around the fascist era, you know, because between the racial laws that were put in place, but more or less at the same time, Italy had this new empire, and they were doing much propaganda, and much of the visual propaganda was around the image of the black woman, the black Abyssinian, beautiful black Abyssinian woman, which to this day, if you are a Somali woman, Eritrean woman, Ethiopian woman, I don't care how ugly you are, you will hear how beautiful you are from Italian people. And it's because they're stuck there. You can never take it as a real, genuine compliment because of that lineage, because of that link. it's scary, but it's everywhere. It's in images, it's in advertisement, and because we don't have the language, because we still have the thought that Italiani are brava gente, Italians are good people, you know, that's what they call us. That's what they call themselves, sorry. I'm so sorry, I'm getting confused between two languages. I apologize. Italiani brava gente is this saying, is this way that Italians have always called themselves, and it comes from the colonialism era. And with this idea that they went and they were not as bad as the British, as the Spanish, as the French. They went, yes, they did, you know, not much. But in reality, it's just they don't talk about it. And we don't talk about it. And once memory is lost, it's lost. But guess what? If you walk in any Italian streets of any small or big Italian cities, you will see it. All you have to do is read the names of the streets and of the big squares. Many of those reminds you and take you directly back to either black people who made some part of Italian history, wars. Everything is linked to us being part of Italian and European history. If you look at art, we are in the art, literally. It's unavoidable. I don't know how they manage. They really are artists. By the way, love you, Italy. I had to go back at some point, you know.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, yeah.
I'm so glad you mentioned the Battle of Adwa.
Oh, yeah.
Because most people in this room and most Americans don't know about the Battle of Adwa. But the Battle of Adwa, March 1st, was when my microphone died. No, it was when...
See, they don't want you to talk about it.
When the Ethiopians defeated the invading Italian army. And it was the only time... Colonialism was only born in 1884, right? That's in Berlin when they just took a big empty map of Africa and carved it up like a pizza pie, right? So then Italy is trying to invade and take its colony, you know, like Leopold had taken Congo, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the Ethiopians, under the leadership of Menelik II, with the Ark of the Covenant, defeated the invading Italian army. You cannot underestimate what a trauma that produced in Italy. And that trauma still exists to this day. And that's why the fascists occupied Ethiopia, as you know, between 1935 and 1941, trying to regain it, and then they were rebuffed again. Most of us also don't know that without Eritrea, Ethiopia has no access to the sea.
Yeah, that's true.
So it's an economic relationship. It's a competition about access to the Red Sea. One of the first uses of the word Eritrea was in a book published in Greek in the 1st century AD called The Periplus of the Eritrean Sea, which is like a TripAdvisor guide down the Red Sea. And it shows how long Europe had been in contact with the kingdom of Aksum and other kingdoms that we would now say were part of either Eritrea or Ethiopia. And for a time, I don't know if it's still true, the leader of Eritrea and the leader of Ethiopia were first cousins. Now, why, I want you to explain to us, just so we know, why was it important for Eritrea and Ethiopia to split? Why was that referendum so overwhelmingly endorsed by Eritrea? Because at the very end, you seem to be doing a critique of the divide, and you end on a very positive unity vision for the future of reunification of the two republics, and I put that quote unquote.
I actually asked the same question to many people who fought in the war for independence, because as somebody who grew up abroad, I also had difficulty deeply understanding why. It's a border created by a third party. Why are we fighting over this? Mm-hmm. It's very difficult to understand if you don't understand the Eritrean and Ethiopian mentality, which I hope if somebody wants to join in the answer, I am very open to it because I don't want to, it's a very important question. I think once you create in a population the idea that you are this and you are this, that divide, at some point, nobody really goes back to where it came from, and somehow it's stuck in your being, in your culture. At the same time, Eritrea was a little bit left and given to the wolves by the Ethiopians at the time. So there's that sentiment too that I believe is the main reason why at some point Eritreans said, okay, now that every outsider is gone, no, now we're gonna do us. Now we're gonna stay on this side, and you're not gonna have access to the sea. Eritrea is a very small country geographically, but it's true geographically. It's put so that it's very important. Ethiopia is huge. It's a huge country in great development, with many political issues and internal divisions. When I met, the reason that I don't do the distinction between Eritreans and Ethiopians is because of the way that I grew up in the diaspora. I need to know that we are one. It's a need of mine because I have family over there. We are all mixed. So in my life, like in the life of many of us, we are really one. And that is true in most places, that there's a detachment between governments and the population. And yes, then the population is militarized and they actually fight. But it's not, government and population and people is not the same thing. It's really not the same thing.
In the end, it's one thing you learn from reading Angela Davis, you learn from reading her mentor, Herbert Marcuse, which my generation had to do, Reason and Revolution. By the way, for those of you who don't know it, Herbert Marcuse said, when I was your age, I read Herbert Marcuse. It was required reading. You don't even read Marcuse anymore. He said the most brilliant student that he ever had was a young African-American woman named Angela Davis. And because of that, at Yale, I took Philosophy 11A, Ethics, because I thought about majoring philosophy, and I never even told you that story myself. But the bottom line is, it was all about the Benjamins. What happened between Ethiopia and Eritrea was all about the Benjamins. It was all about money. It was all about economic relationships.
Yeah.
And ethnicity followed economic relationships.
Benjamin.
What'd you say?
When I was thinking Walter Benjamin, because there's that wonderful quote from Walter Benjamin.
Oh, yes, Walter Benjamin.
At the beginning of the film.
Yeah, Benjamin, yes, absolutely.
Thank you. Medhin, I congratulate you for your work.
What's happening?
Well, let's just do two questions
sorry.
then. Let's
go ahead.
Go ahead.
Should I go ahead?
Sorry.
Working. Well, I'll cut short my question so the fellow comrade can get. See, I approached to this question as a Dalit from India. And for us, we are outcast, but still we fall upon the nation state. So as much as we are citizens, we are living denizens. So the India becomes always a falling back. And when in fact, the very idea of nation is not fruitful, it's actually working against you. So now in your case, which there were three divisions, people who support, who don't, and who are in middle, what constitutes Eritrea? You said it's a memory, but is it asphyxiation to the nationhood? Again, nationhood has been critiqued here. So I was wondering, how do they interrogate such questions, because they are still living under the mixed affinity of nationhood?
Now that's a beautiful question. I usually get the questions in regards of the Italians, but I love it in regards of Eritreans because it's such, because it's so new. I think it's in the work. I think it's gonna have to be a deep conversation between the people who are still in the country and the diaspora that is now huge. It's probably more of us abroad than in the country because of all the fleeing of the people. So I don't think anybody could tell you who an Eritrean is other than the personal experience as a people. You know, I think it's in the works. Most people would tell you we're proud, and our roots, we pride ourselves in that war for independence. But see, regardless of the fact of if you're pro or against government, you're still going to take pride in that same part of history, Eritrean history. It's very complicated. And I'm going to just answer even if you didn't ask. In regards of the Italian people, they also don't know who they are. And that's why they have such a big problem with people like me, Asian-looking Italians, African-looking Italians, black, you know, any Italian that is not white or has an accent from abroad, they ask us to wave the Italian flag, which is a thing that they barely do. They ask us to, oh, tell me what does it mean to be an Italian, and they don't even know. Because they're also so diverse and in some ways divided. Also, another small country that has so much diversity, and also, like she was saying, if they go look into their roots, they're not gonna find whiteness. They're not.
So we technically don't have time for any more questions, but this young man right behind Molly has had his hand since the beginning, so I just want to, you can just be very, very brief.
Thank you. And I want to thank you for making such a beautiful and enlightening film.
Thank you.
I wanted to touch upon a point you made earlier that there are gaps in the education system, in place of colonization, where that should be. And frankly, in my experience, we've had the same situation here in the United States, where we don't like to talk about colonization. And I just wanted to ask, have there been any efforts made to address that, dancing around the issue and controversy of colonization, or has nothing been done about it?
I couldn't hear the first part of the question.
Oh, how's this?
If there have been any efforts to address the silence around colonization?
It's starting, especially in the academic context, with the whole idea of postcolonialism that I have some issues with. But at least they're trying, and now we're actually speaking about what really happened, you know, and the platform is being given to Italians of different descent quite a bit, writers, filmmakers, activists. So, sorry, I lost you. It's happening. One thing is that I see the birth of some groups of Black Italians, Neri Italiani, and I wish and I hope that they, and I say they even though I am a Black Italian myself, they do their job right. And that means if you want to go forward and actually create social change in that specific country and territory, you have to look for your own history and connect and look for help and advices from others that did the same thing or similar thing abroad, specifically the Black American, African American community, but we don't share the same history. So you cannot go and mention all these beautiful African American heroes if you don't do the same work on you. Yeah. We have to look into this colonialism thing and be way beyond that, because also our history didn't start with colonialism either. So we as Black Italians have to do that work, and it's a very personal work while staying in contact transnationally.
So.
Thank you. Thank you.